So like I said, my presentation is on Joshua 10 and Makkedah. I use I use it as kind of an example for identifying a biblical site. I do want to thank a few people. This is my first conference, so I thank the organizers. Thank Dr. Stripling for his guidance in this project. I'm thankful to be at the Bible Seminary. Pinch myself every day. A lot of my information comes from the late David Dorsey. I really appreciate his efforts in identifying Makkedah, or attempting to identify Makkedah. And his daughter, Sarah Bollinger, provided access to his work. And then I was inspired to do what I'm doing today because the Associates for Biblical Research. I wanted to shout out to them as well. So in the 10th chapter of Joshua, it describes the conquest of several cities by Joshua and the Israelites following a battle with the Amorites in defense of the city of Gibeon. And if you recall, there was a peace, they had a treaty they were tricked into with the Gibeonites. And after battling the Amorites, the Israelites commenced a campaign against 7 Amorite cities. In Joshua 10 through 39, you can read that. And as the account of the battle progresses, the Israelites capture 5 Amorite kings, subsequently kill them, and inter their bodies in a cave at Makkedah. And so the exact location of the ancient tale of Makkedah is still unknown. For this analysis, I'm using a biblical chronology. The Israelite exodus from Egypt and Joshua's conquest of the Promised Land occurred during the late Bronze Age. Therefore, I used an early date for the Exodus, 1446 BC, and the conquest dates as 1406 and 1400 BC. So the events of Joshua 10 would have occurred after the Israelites destroyed Jericho. They're camped at Gilgal, and it's after they destroyed Ai as well. So any discussion about the theory and methodology of archaeology must inevitably involve a discussion about the process for locating a biblical site. And this process aids in excavating at the most likely location before, costly expenditures and years of digging and realizing you're at the wrong place. And so the process for that is, there's 6 of them. And the first one is examining occurrences of the town name in biblical and extra-biblical literature to gain an approximate idea of the location of the site, analyzing the modern town names for remnants of ancient town names, discovering archaeological ruins that fit the expected time and location of the town, exploring the various traditional identifications for the town's location, and examining the geography associated with the possible site of the town. And then 6, examining the archaeology of other sites to see if there's evidence mentioning or relative to the target site. So you might find something in one city that's talking about another city. In the case of Makkedah, we have an examination of a particular phrase in Joshua 10:10 that may also help us identify the location of the tale. So Makkedah was of sufficient importance to be mentioned in the narrative as having a king and being destroyed by the Israelites. And as we'll see, it's an association with some other cities, that they battled that had a king and were mentioned also. Makkedah appears in 3 chapters of Joshua 10, 12, and 15. In 12:16, it mentions Makkedah on the list of kings defeated by the Israelites. 15:41, Makkedah is in the territorial allotment of Judah. And Joshua associates Makkedah with the other cities of the Shephelah and Judah. Extra biblical texts reference Makkedah by name and location. There are several, probably the most recent evidence in the last 40 or 50 years are over 2,000 Edomian ostraca from the 4th century BC that mention Makkedah or Makkedah. And I'll talk more about that later. Josephus suggested that Makkedah is a rural city of the Canaanites, but we know that the story is about Amorites. I won't do a deep dive into who the Amorites are, but primarily they occupied the Shephelah and hill country. Eusebius places Makkedah 8 Roman miles, 4,860 feet per mile east of Ulathropolis or Beit Guvrin. All other cities associated with Joshua 10 include Gilgal, Gibeon, Azekah, Libnah, Lachish, Gezer, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir, in that order. All the known sites have some evidence of occupation in the late Bronze Age, except for Debir, which is relatively unknown. However, the archaeological data at some of the sites, they will mention LB1, LB2. Some of the sites just mention late Bronze Age, so they don't really define the sub-periods that well. I have a bunch of slides for the different sites and what the significant finds are, but for sake of time, they're at the end, and if I have time, I might go through some of them, or if you have any questions about them. So this is basically what we're looking at. So most of you probably know this, the plains of Philistia, and then Shephelah in the hill country. And we're going to be in this area, in the territorial allotment of Judah, east or west of the Dead Sea. And that's a better idea of where we're at. So we'd be here, Marishah, Eglon, yeah, you see some of the cities there. All right, 8 Roman miles would be from, now this map here has it as Beit Gurin, and then you have Hebron. And so you can see the proximity to what 8 Roman miles, according to Eusebius, would be in relation to Hebron. And then that's a blown up version of it. So if you go, there's a reason there's an arrow here, because of the possible site of Makkedah, and then if you went due east from Beit Gurin, you would be just north of Tarkamite, and then here you'd be south of Idna. The geography of the routes taken by the Israelite forces contributes to the potential identification of the site. Joshua 4:19 states that they were camped at Gilgal, which is on the eastern edge of Jericho, and the Israelites traveled 18 miles from Gilgal to Gibeon, ascending over 3,500 feet. So up here, Jericho, Gilgal, and then Gibeon. So they're ascending over 3,500 feet there. And then according to Joshua 10:10, the Lord confounded them and pursued them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. The ascent of Beth Horon is the main route in and out of the hill country. So there is an upper and lower, and there's an upper and lower Beth Horon, and that's running about 10 miles from east to west, coming from Gibeon. And then Azekah lies about 15.5 miles south of the lower Beth Horon. And during the day of the pursuit, Joshua mentions, and this gets a little controversial, so I don't do a deep dive into this either. It's when the moon stands still in the valley of Ayalon and the sun stood still in Gibeon. He says, "Oh Lord, these things." And then it says almost a whole day was added to the battle. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The Israelites had to pass through the Ayalon Valley on their way to Azekah. So you can see here, fits geographically. So they're going from Gibeon, upper Beth Horon, lower Beth Horon, Ayalon Valley. That's where the day is stood still, and then they're going to be moving south to Azekah. Today, that's Tel Zachariah. The Israelites entered the Shephelah, traveling south in the lower Beth Horon through Azekah, and so according to Rainey, the boundaries of the Shephelah sort of equate to the territorial allotment of Judah, and so I showed you that map. And so the Amorites in Joshua 10 were those, and they can be, people call them Canaanites, but they're Amorites, and they've resided in the Shephelah in the hill country. So the cities attacked after Makkedah are Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Debir, and Hebron, all in that area. Libnah and Lachish, and Eglon are in the Shephelah, but Hebron and Debir are a little further east in the hill country. Well, we don't really know where Debir is, so we're just kind of assuming that it's that direction, following the route of the battle. And it kind of gives you an idea. So that would be, if Tel Bernah is Libnah, which the archaeologist believes it is, then Lachish, and you have Eglon, and then Hebron. And so, where's Makkedah? The 5 Amorite kings hid in a cave at Makkedah, and Oren surveyed this back in 65, surveyed the several caves in the Shephelah, and the area covered in Oren's survey ran from Azekah to south of Lachish. And although it focused on later periods, it's useful for this because of the soft limestone caves in the Shephelah region. Sorry about this. This comes from his journal article, but you can kind of get an idea. So its survey went from south of Azekah to south of Lachish, all the way to the Marishah, to Green, but not quite into the area of Hebron. And so, and I know just from research, if you go up to like the settlement of Luzit, they have the Luzit caves. They do spelunking and rappelling in those caves. Of course, you have Adullam in that region, Adullam, where David hid from Saul. And then in Marishah, also there's caves. This one is from Luzit, northern Shephelah. That's one from Adullam. Okay? So in the text of Joshua 10, it states, as far as Azekah and Makkedah. So in Hebrew, that would be, and pardon any mispronunciation, I have taken Hebrew, Ad Azekah wa'ad Makkedah. And according to Dorsey, that prepositional construction in Joshua 10:10, which is ad wa'ad, normally represents two termini. So here to here, so to speak, if I may be so bold to translate or transliterate. The second, which lies not near, but beyond the first. The question is, how far beyond? So there are several locations where this prepositional construction occurs and has the same meaning, and that is like Joshua 16, Nehemiah, and 3 verses in Nehemiah and 1 Samuel. So, assuming that is the case, however, the use of the phrase does not appear to represent a particular direction. So it's here to here, so to speak, as far as. And it appears to be a form of measure for the reader in the mention of known locations, and to the extent to which something continued or extended. It is also use of the extent of time we see in 1 Kings, or a degree extending to a certain point in Malachi, and an extent of quantity in Genesis. So the Septuagint reads, though, and they smote them to Azekah and to Makkedah. I think the NIV was translated all the way to Azekah and Makkedah, which, and some people have interpreted as that Makkedah is close to Azekah, but not according to Dorsey. The previous interpretation of 10:10 seems to indicate that it's some unknown distance beyond Azekah, traveling south from Beth Horon if you follow the natural route. So they're descending south. They're fleeing from the Lord. And there's hailstones being tossed on the Amorites, right? And so the cities could also be near each other, but again, that's how you interpret it. The interpretation may be that Makkedah is much further if the author was relaying the furthest known location in the entire battle narrative. So you look at chapter 10 as a holistically. The only thing is later in chapter 10, you get this larger conquest narrative that even includes Gaza. So it depends on how you're reading Joshua 10. So in verses 10, 12 to 13, which indicate almost a whole day of the added to the battle, and if you take that literally, then how far can the army travel from the Ayalon Valley in a day? Because now you have a whole extra day. Well, it depends on when they started traveling. So there's some complication with that. However, after the Lord decimated the Amorite forces, the kings hid in a cave. The cave may have served as a shelter from the large hailstones. And in verse 11, Makkedah is not mentioned. I found no text where Makkedah was ever added to verse 11. So if you say, if the Lord threw large hailstones on them as far as Azekah, and they were hiding in the cave, this is supposition only. If they're hiding in a cave from the hailstones, it would probably be closer to Azekah. Makkedah would be closer. Because the Amorites, more Amorites died from the hailstones than from the Israelite soldiers. So, I don't do a deep dive into this, but there's some textual issues. And is Joshua 10 part of the Deuteronomistic history? If you've heard of that, it's where Joshua is so much like Deuteronomy, and then Judges has such a different conquest account. So then they theorized that there was one writer who compiled all 3 books. Is Joshua 10 made up of 3 separate stories? And there's some reasons for that. I don't go into that because, as Dorsey would say, and I agree, that even if this is the case, the chapter is still useful for locating Makkedah unless it is geographically nonsensical. And I think it is. It makes sense. So, All right, the thing you all been waiting for. What are the possible sites? And I've chosen 3 of the best, what I consider to be the best candidates. Deir Deban in the western Shephelah, it's closer to Azekah. Khirbet Beit Makdum in the southern Shephelah, and Khirbet El-Kum, which also is in the southern Shephelah. Albright was a proponent of Deir Deban in the northern Shephelah or western Shephelah, northwestern Shephelah, and he later changed his views, citing an absence of a fortified city. El-Kum is the largest site, but has not produced any Middle or Late Bronze Age pottery. And Dever favored El-Kum because of the natural caves found between Azekah and Lachish and the sizable mound. Later, Dorsey would say the tell has to be somewhere besides Makdum, and he thought it might be El-Kum also because of the sizable mound. They are very close to each other, by the way. And so here's just to help you out here. It's kind of hard to do pictorials talking about geography directions. Zachariah, so Azekah, there's Deir Deban. Beit Gubrin, Libna would be somewhere, I don't have it marked, but it would be between here and Lachish. And so you would have El-Kum and Makdum down here, and you can see they're about almost halfway between Lachish and Hebron. So, if you're going with the farthest distance from Azekah, you would be potentially down here. So this span, and you would not be close. And there's some evidence for why that might be the location. And this gives you a little better idea. I don't know if you can see this, but you can see El-Kum, Makdum. So see how close they are. The problem is there's no evidence at either location. And there it is again. Okay, so Dorsey believed Makdum was the direct descendant of the ancient Makkedah, the main reasons being the location of the site in the southern Shephelah, the Arabic consonants, Mem, Kof, Dalet. The location is closest cited by Eusebius, and I was talking to Dr. Chris McKinney, and he felt like Eusebius was mostly right, and so that I thought lended to the argument. Makkedah was part of the Lachish district. This I don't understand as well, and I'll admit that now, but it includes the cities of Eglon and Debir, which we think is south down there, or I think is south in the southern Shephelah. So that's one of Dorsey's arguments, but he said the exact boundaries of what's called the so-called Lachish district from Joshua 15 was not as clear, but that was one of his arguments. Makdum is the only site that preserves remnant of the Hebrew consonants, as I mentioned. The meaning of Makkedah is not certain. It may be a place of shepherds prodding, herding, or pointing. It's really only identified as a place name in Judah. I talked to a linguist, and there are no Arabic cognates for the term that he knew of, so the identification would be based on the consonants alone, use of the consonants in a later period. So Makkedah may have been converted to something intelligible in Arabic, and Rainey says that was a well-known technique. So they just take the consonants and say, well, let's name it this, or something like that. Dorsey, like I said, Dorsey favored Makdum, but he felt the tell was somewhere else because of the evidence. And so he concluded, and most people quote him and say this. So when you ever see Dorsey associated with Khirbet El-Kum, they'll say, they're referencing probably the journal article that I have somewhere around here, where he says, the tell must be there because Makdum doesn't have the evidence. And then Chris McKinney threw in an interesting point, and if it wasn't in the West Bank, we could go look. McKinney suggested that the ancient Makkedah tell, maybe a place called Khirbet Ures, just a couple of kilometers north of Makdum. The tell is larger, and it was occupied in the Middle Bronze through the Iron II periods, including the Late Bronze Age. Now, I don't recall right offhand how he knew that, but there is at least one tell nearby that could be the ancient tell. This is modern Al-Kum, Marak, Beit Makdum, and Hamza. It's just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So it's a pretty occupied area. So the logical location for Makkedah is along a route traveling south from Azekah, and perhaps between Azekah and Libnah. routes from Azekah going south to each of the proposed sites. Khirbet Makdum and Al-Qum are 12 to 14 miles south of Azekah, so I thought that was considerable. And they're on a route going through, you go through the Elah Valley, and this route goes through the Sidonian Chalk Valley, and it's called, according to Schlegel, the Chalk Moat Route. So let's say, now don't pay attention to that. This is from Schlegel's map. This would probably be further south to Al-Qum and Makdum. So coming through the Elah Valley, south down to the Sidonian Chalk Valley, Chalk Moat Route, and you would arrive here. And you see where it puts you in juxtaposition to other cities. Longer gap in time might explain the distance, or the extra day. Libnah and Lachish were the next cities attacked by the Israelites after Makkedah. So if Khirbet El-Qum or Makdum or another tell in the area they are in between Hebron and Lachish, so they are in proximity. And the advantage of El-Qum and Beit Makdum at Makkedah is the Guvrin Valley, and I'll show you that. So here's Al-Qum, Makdum would be up here, so that they could easily travel. Beit Guvrin is up there, so the Guvrin Valley, or Nahal Guvrin. And then, so they have this incident with the Amorites in the cave at Makdum, and then they travel up to, if Tel Bernah is Libnah, then that would be the next site, and then they could go due south to Lachish. And there gives you an idea. So they could travel up to Libnah, then down to Lachish, and then finish off Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. So in support of Dorsey's view that Makdum or Al-Qum is Makkedah, there's, like I said, the 2,000 plus ostraga from the 4th century Edomia. And many of the inscriptions, I think there's about 25 inscriptions that say Makkedah or Makkedah. Of course, this, about 1,000 years after the incident. Andre Lemaire believes at least 1,600 ostraga came from Khirbet El-Qum, and at least 25 mention Makkedah. The problem is there's about 9 private collections that hold these ostraga because they hit the antiquity. They were illegally excavated and hit the antiquities market, and then people, like the Dead Sea Scrolls early on, that people figured out, what do we got here? And then people started collecting them. But researchers have gone around, like Lemaire and Porton and Yardini, they went around and examined these private collections. And here's an example. And I think this is it here. With a Mem Kof, I don't know, I want to say that's maybe a Dalet and a Hay. So another look at it. To the storehouse of Makkedah. So a lot of these were like financial records, records of transactions. So now I give equal treatment to the 3 sites I mentioned. I'm going to talk about Der Diban. It is farther north. It's closer to Azekah. Albright changed his tune about this. He said, well, there's no fortified city. Chris McKinney agreed. He says, I drive by there every day when we're excavating. There's nothing there. And so, but I'm going to give it equal treatment just because of the location, and I'll show you why. Deir Diban lies southwest of Azekah, and depending on the interpretation, it could be it. The modern settlement of Luzit, Israel, is located there. And that gives you an idea just from an earlier, that's a Condor and Kitchener map from the 19th century. This gives you an idea. Because it was still, there were still quite a few remnants of it up until the 20th century, I think. So Schlegel identifies a diagonal route that runs from Azekah to Bet Guvrin, or Eleutheropolis, then further south to Lachish. And Diban is approximately 2 miles west of that diagonal route. You go further south, Libnah, or Tel Bernah, lies about 2 miles northwest of the diagonal route. You keep going by way of the Guvrin Valley, then you can reach Lachish by the diagonal route. So here, using Schlegel's map again, so this was our route to Makdum and Al-Qum. Here's our diagonal route coming from Azekah. So Diban would be up here, Libnah, Lachish, and you'd have that. So give you, I know that's hard to see, So it's almost a straight line traveling from Azekah, Makkedah, Libnah to Lachish. And there's not evidence at Dibon. It could be a tell in the area. And then it gives you an idea of what it might look like. So it'd be a straight shot. And the red line is the actual, just kind of following the valley. And then I just put the straight line there to give you an idea of the distance. There it is again. So in conclusion, the search for biblical Makkedah exhibits most of the steps for the process of identifying a biblical site. It's based on the geography and the biblical passages regarding Makkedah, and the ruins of Makkedah exist somewhere beyond Azekah to the south. Makkedah is located somewhere in the Shephelah, where there's soft limestone caves. Archaeological excavations at Gibeon, Azekah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, and Hebron show that some of the cities were occupied during the Late Bronze Age. So it's not like it's a mythical city in my mind. And Makkedah and El-Qum are in the Shephelah in relative proximity to Libnah and Lachish. And Makkedah, of course, preserves those continents. El-Qum is a large site but lacks evidence. And both Makkedah and El-Qum lie further south of Dibon, but there are explanations for that, why that would be. And it also places them in proximity to Libnah. And so if Deir Dibon is closer, Deir is closer to Azekah, depending on how you interpret Joshua 10, it could be it. Additional evidence for verifying the location will require more surveys, more excavations of existing sites, or even new sites that we might find. When Makkedah is located, it may reveal Late Bronze Age evidence and evidence of destruction by the Israelites. And even now, the cave may still have the 5 bodies that, as Joshua would say, are buried there. They're in the cave, sealed with large stones to this very day. So there you go. That would be nice to find, wouldn't it? How much time?